Welcome to the Belly Button Window channel and episode 40 of the Jimi Hendrix story like you've never heard it before. In this episode, we deep dive into January and February of 1970. In an action-packed episode, we explore the final two Band of GYPSYS concerts at the Fillmore East, the Winter Festival for Peace debacle, the attempts to reform the experience, plus more. Please remember to check the channel's community tab and video information page, where you will find links to related videos, performances, and stunning photographs from the period. Hendrix's all-new Band of GYPSYS by Lorraine Alterman for Rolling Stone. The Fillmore East blasted the new year in with the debut of Jimi Hendrix's new group, a Band of GYPSYS. But the Hendrix of the first day of 1970 was subdued compared to the experience of the 60s. With Buddy Miles on drums and Billy Cox on bass, Hendrix's one concession to the past was a rendition of Foxy Lady, during which he bent his knees, leaned back, and played the guitar from his crotch. On New Year's Eve, it was reported he did his teeth-picking routine, but otherwise the tricks are gone. Instead, Hendrix stands still and concentrates on playing his guitar better than ever. Unfortunately, a Band of GYPSYS doesn't quite measure up to Hendrix's art. Cox, an old friend of Hendrix, provides solid support on bass, but Miles insists on grabbing his share of the spotlight as a singer. The drummer seems to suffer from the delusion that he is another Otis Redding, when neither his styling nor his voice have anything to distinguish him from the run-of-the-mill R&B singer. Most of the songs are new, and Hendrix admitted to the audience that they weren't yet completed, but the band was having fun jamming anyway. Only one number, Machine Gun, stands out as truly exciting. Hendrix dedicated it to all the soldiers in Detroit, New York, Chicago, and oh yes, Vietnam. Punctuated by the rat-tat-tat of the drums, sounding like machine gun fire, the number captures the tension and violence of the revolutionary struggle. Hendrix's guitar wails with the cry of the streets and the sound of sirens. Although the lyrics were impossible to hear over the thunder of the band, the music is message enough. The rest of the songs, including one called Trying to Be and another Earth Blues Today, which Hendrix said is about a whole lot of people trying to get their thing together and a whole lot of other people effing them up, tend to sound very much alike. Stylistically, they aren't far from Purple Haze days. At the first show on New Year's Day, the audience really let loose with cheers only on the old Foxy Lady. In all fairness, however, his second show reportedly went over much better, especially when he and Miles sang a plea for unity about how we've all got to live together, a song they did together in a jam at the Newport 69 Festival in Los Angeles. If the fans can forget the visual show, and if Hendrix can come up with a new approach to material for a Band of GYPSYS, he'll remain heavy on the scene. January 1st, 1970, at the Fillmore East in New York City, the Band of GYPSYS performed the two scheduled New Year's Day shows. Setlist for the first concert, Who Knows, Machine Gun, Them Changes, Power of Soul, including Crash Landing and Paper Airplanes, Stepping Stone, aka Trying to Be, of which it is the last live version, Foxy Lady, Stop, Hear My Train, A-Comin', Earth Blues, and Burning Desire. According to one Jimi Hendrix forum reviewer, only two titles from the third Band of GYPSYS concert have never been officially published. Them Changes, of which there are already two versions, and Earth Blues. The first two tracks, Who Knows and Machine Gun, from this concert constitute side one of the Band of GYPSYS album, and any doubts aroused by the Band of GYPSYS' second New Year's Eve performance dissipate upon hearing the first bars of Who Knows. Followed by Machine Gun, which he introduces thus: Happy New Year, first of all. I hope you get another million or two if we can make it past this summer. Yeah, we'd like to dedicate this one to, it's kind of really boring scene that goes on. All these soldiers fighting in Chicago and Milwaukee and New York. Oh yeah, and all these soldiers fighting in Vietnam. I'd like to do something called Machine Gun. The introduction is followed by a disturbing solo, which plunges us into the creeping humidity of Vietnam. More suggested than played frankly, the notes make their way like GIs into hostile territory. With Machine Gun, Hendrix enters the final stage of his evolution, with the vocal-guitar fusion carried out here by Jimi far exceeds all that has preceded in terms of freedom. While Billy Cox and Buddy Miles offer alternately, but not necessarily at the same times, two types of rhythms each, thus contributing to the oppressive climate of the track. If the Band of GYPSYS versions are so different from those of the Cry of Love band, it's because Buddy Miles and Mitch Mitchell have a diametrically opposed playing philosophy. Buddy Miles bounces on the bass line, where Mitch Mitchell sticks to the soloist. On New Year's Day 1970, We must recognize that Buddy Miles best served Jimmy's music, with the alternating groove and martial rhythm evoking the eponymous machine gun. The solo begins with 2 infinite takes, where Hendrix expresses more with a single note than anything that could have been written or filmed about Vietnam. Pain and compassion merge into a heartbreaking cry. Long phrases full of blues precede trills, modulated with vibrato which die away in the feedback. The drums become machine guns. Jimmy's amps scream the horror of war in a deluge of screams and bombs. Hendrix achieves more than a synthesis of blues and free jazz. He goes beyond them, transcends these styles. Jimmy retunes his low E as Billy Cox launches the no-quarter riff. He sings a last verse where the unease is increased tenfold by the choirs, in tune this time, which descend chromatically. To the same accompaniment, Jimmy launches into the most radical solo of his entire career. No more fretted notes, no more melody here. Vibrato, feedback and percussion serve up a speech that mocks conventions. Here again, the dazzling instrumental mastery in the service of emotion culminates in genius. Hendrix is a virtuoso in the noble sense of the term, who serves the music and not his ego. Buddy Miles sings the final verse of Machine Gun with his guts, without falling into pathos. The final solo plunges us into an aquatic climate. Hendrix plays with only the right hand, using the left for vibrato, noisy and finally apocalyptic. As an encore to this, the third concert, the Band of Gypsys offer the last live version ever played of Burning Desire. The reviewer arrives at the following conclusion. This is the best of the Band of Gypsys concerts. If the performance suffers from some weaknesses absent from the first concert, the strong moments are so powerful that we must ignore them. Machine Gun is arguably the high point of his work. Hendrixian genius is characterized in particular by risk-taking, even endangerment. And if the guitarist's concerts still arouse such interest today, it is precisely because of the spontaneity of his performances. The fourth and final show setlist, Stone Free, Power of Soul, Changes, Message to Love, Machine Gun, Lover Man, Stop, Earth Blues, Foxy Lady, Steal Away, Burning Desire, Voodoo Child, Slight Return, We Gotta Live Together, Wild Thing, Hey Joe, and Purple Haze. While in this Jimi Hendrix Forum excerpt, we hear a commentary of the fourth and final Fillmore performance. Side 2 of the Band of Gypsys album, published in 1970, is entirely devoted to this last performance of the group at the Fillmore East, leaving only the last 2 tracks from the concert to have never been officially released. On the other hand, the versions of Power of Soul and We Gotta Live Together are edited. The repertoire has a significantly different tone from the other 3 concerts, with new compositions and classics from the experience represented in comparable proportions. It is difficult to speculate on the motivations for such a refocusing. Desire to break the house by lining up the hits, recording of the classics of the experience with a live perspective, desire to have fun, desire not to play the same titles as during the previous concerts. Once again, Hendrix wishes the audience a happy new year before he attacks the introduction to Power of Soul. Hendrix begins the introduction to Machine Gun without taking the time to retune, and it's completely regrettable because Jimmy starts off on an unstable, even dubious foundation to say the least. Unlike the legendary version played a few hours before, the parts where guitar and vocals are in unison are reduced to the bare minimum, and the verses are much less strong. Hendrix turns on his fuzz as soon as he launches the no-quarter riff and immediately goes solo. The choirs with the chromatic descent are also present. They usefully contribute to establishing an unease that does not dissipate a very furious solo from Jimmy, very original. His soloist technique makes it possible to hide the problems of accuracy, which are less obvious in the deliberately dissonant context of this passage. Interesting solo, therefore, even if KRAMER edited the end, where Hendrix takes the riff out of tune like never before. The heart is not necessarily there during the next verse, an exchange of fire between Hendrix and Miles, where Buddy plays curiously out of tempo at times, precedes a free solo from Jimmy, mixing feedback and percussion. Hendrix then builds a mountain of saturation, drops a stream of bombs on the Fillmore, then finishes by quoting taps, good times, but too uneven. And in the conclusion of the reviewer, a very uneven final performance from the Band of Gypsys. Magical moments, intensity, but also lengths and failures. Side 2 of Band of Gypsys is the ideal summary of this last concert at the Fillmore. The first shows of the 2 days were undoubtedly superior to the second, and the day of January 1st was busier than that of December 31st. The third concert is thus one of the highlights of Jimmy's career, while the second is reserved for amateurs only. Eddie Kramer, in reference to the mixing of the Band of Gypsys album, recalled, "I remember very well Jimmy moaning when it came to Buddy's solo material, which was endless. Jimmy would say something like, 'Holy shit, Buddy, shut up.' We had to make a lot of cuts to improve everything. By that, I mean he loved playing with Buddy. Don't get me wrong. It's just that at times Buddy could be a little excessive, and Jimmy thought it appropriate to do so, to cut judiciously." Friday the 2nd of January. Jimmy is interviewed by Alfred Aronowitz of the New York Post. Wednesday the 7th of January, recording at the record plant, with songs under construction, Cherokee Mist, Astro Man, Stepping Stone, Room Full of Mirrors, Isabella, and Easy Rider. Wednesday the 14th of January, at Juggy Sound Studios, Kim King, assistant recording engineer, Eddie Kramer, and Jimi Hendrix begin reviewing the multi-track recordings from the Band of Gypsys' FILLMORE East gigs. For the next month, time would be spent selecting, editing, and sequencing tracks for the live album that was owed to Capitol Records. Friday the 16th of January. In the early morning, after spending hours mixing with Eddie Kramer at Juggy Sound Studios, Hendrix left for the record plant to regain strength with Billy Cox and Buddy Miles, and for a series of demo recordings. 12 takes were recorded of Paper Airplanes, which would develop into Power of Soul, and 5 takes of Burning Desire. Additionally, Jimmy's efforts resulted in a rough sketch of Send My Love to Linda, which then progressed into a very lively and extended jam. Monday the 19th of January, at Juggy Sound Studios. Once again, Jimmy started the night with Eddie Kramer, mixing potential candidates for the Band of Gypsys' live album. Neither Billy Cox nor Buddy Miles had any role in the album's mixing or track decisions. Hendrix being the producer, these decisions were entirely his. While at the record plant and with Cox and Miles, Hendrix spent some of his time experimenting with different retrograde guitar effects. This session also saw additional work on Burning Desire, but with little notable progress towards completing a basic track. Between January 20th and 23rd, Jimi Hendrix was busy at the record plant, working on various recordings, many of which would later appear on the posthumous album Rainbow Bridge, such as Message to Love, Stepping Stone, Easy Rider, and Earth Blues, featuring the Ronettes on vocals. Wednesday, the 21st of January, included the tracks Astro Man, Power of Soul, Valleys of Neptune, Message to Love, Stepping Stone, Earth Blues, and Easy Rider. Later in the day, Jimmy participated in a jam session with Taj Mahal at his apartment on 12th Street in New York. Thursday, the 22nd of January, saw recordings of Sky Blues, Today, aka Stepping Stone, Isabella, and Dancing Blues. And Friday, the 23rd of January, Country Blues, Once I Had a Woman, Blue Suede Shoes, Highway of Desire Blues Jam, $7 in My Pocket, Astro Man Jam, Captain Coconut, MLK, Easy Rider Jam, Country Blues, Midnight Lightning, Once I Had a Woman, and Astro Man. Monday, the 26th of January, Noel Redding flies to New York City. Noel recalled, "Mike Jeffrey sent me a plane ticket, and by the end of January we'd met, talked it out, been interviewed by Rolling Stone, and signed a document authorizing Jeffrey to contract 3 major tours. A US tour to gross between $750,000 and $1 million, 1 major tour of Western Europe and the UK, and a tour of Japan." Wednesday, the 28th of January, the Winter Festival for Peace at Madison Square Garden. Billed as the Winter Festival for Peace, Peter Yarrow, of Peter, Paul and Mary, and Sid Bernstein, event producers, announced that their services would be donated and that all proceeds of the event will go to the Vietnam moratorium effort. The 5-hour festival, slated from 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., would feature Harry Belafonte, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Dave Brubeck, Richie Havens, Mother Earth, Peter, Paul and Mary, The Rascals, The Cast of Hair, Judy Collins, and Jimi Hendrix and his Band of Gypsys. The band took the stage around 3 a.m. in what would prove to be their final performance, and perhaps the biggest fiasco of Jimmy's entire career. After introducing the members of the group, and after an audience member screams out a request for Foxy Lady, a clearly exhausted and intoxicated Hendrix replies that Foxy Lady is sitting over there, in yellow, dirty, blood-stained underwear. The group then launched into a particularly uninspired and incredibly limp version of Who Knows. The following song, Earth Blues, was even less convincing, with Hendrix calling out to the audience as he stops playing. That's what happens when the Earth fucks with space. Never forget that. This is what happens. Then he sat on stage, silent. Meanwhile, Buddy Miles tried to calm things down, facing a disbelieving audience by promising a return on stage, something which ultimately would not happen. Hendrix unplugged his Stratocaster and left the stage for good, leaving Buddy Miles to manage the crowd. According to Alan Douglas, when Jimi came off stage, he actually fell. At first I thought he was hurt, but he wasn't. I then ran backstage to the dressing room to see if in fact he was okay. There he was, sitting playing the guitar and smiling. I don't know what went through his mind when he was on stage, but the first thing I noticed, it looked like he was having a big rhythm problem. I think he just got fed up. Backstage, Jimi meets Johnny Winter. In recounting the meeting, Winter explains, "I saw Jimi backstage at the Madison Square Garden concert, the one where he just couldn't play. When I saw him, it made me chill. It was the most horrible thing I'd ever seen. He came in with this entourage of people, and it was like he was already dead. He just walked in, and even though Jimi and I weren't the greatest of friends, we always talked, always. And he came in with his head down, sat on the couch alone, and put his head in his hands. He didn't say a word to anyone, and no one spoke to him. He didn't move until it was time for the show. He really wanted to do that gig, but he never should have. It wasn't that it was bad, but his whole thing was inspiration, and there wasn't anything. It was just completely uninspired. Finally, right in the middle of a song, he just took his guitar off, sat on the stage. The band was still playing, and told the audience, 'I'm sorry, we just can't get it together.' One of his people said he was sick and led him off stage. He was just so unhappy that there was no way that he could play the show. It didn't have anything to do with the group. He had already died." I remember Cher saying in an interview that she had met Jimi backstage before the event, and that he was so sweet and extremely shy and polite. She never mentioned anything about him being ill, while fellow bandmate Buddy Miles claimed that their manager, Mike Jeffrey, had slipped Hendrix 2 bad tabs of LSD in an attempt to embarrass him and reform the Jimi Hendrix experience. He is quoted as having said the following, "My sister and I saw Jeffrey slip Jimi 2 tabs of LSD, and I personally saw him take them. He looked so scared." The date also marks the final performance of the Band of Gypsies, as the group was disbanded after the disastrous performance. Coincidentally, Mitch flies back to New York City on the same day. While according to Hendrix author John McDermott, no other member of Hendrix's management team present at the concert accepts the Mike Jeffrey sabotage story. Considering Jeffrey's personal investment in the concert and his notorious aversion to negative publicity, it is highly improbable that his motive was to embarrass his meal ticket before a sold-out audience. For another perspective, Sharon Lawrence in her biography of Hendrix wrote, "When I heard from Jimi in early February, he told me, 'Devon hit me with some bad acid. I was out of my mind at the Garden.'" Personally and musically, he had nothing but cold words for Buddy Miles. I asked what had gone wrong with the Band of Gypsies. He said sarcastically, "Mr. Miles did not hear the songs the way I did." Friday the 30th of January. Jimi goes to see Jack Bruce and friends at the Fillmore East. Mitch Mitchell recalled, "I'd been playing during this period with Jack Bruce and Larry Coryell. I knew the Band of Gypsies thing was going to take place, and lo and behold, I got a call from Jack Bruce. Would you like to have a play with him and Larry?" We went out as Jack Bruce and friends and did a short UK tour, followed by a gig at the Fillmore East. I was actually booked into a hotel, but I spent most of the following week staying with Jimi and Devon Wilson, Jimi's girlfriend, down in his apartment in the Village. The pressure had seemed to ease off at that point. He knew he wasn't happy with the Band of Gypsies, but he hadn't got anything else going on. Sunday, the 1st of February, at the Record Plant recordings of Stepping Stone, Send My Love to Linda. Last Thursday morning, Freedom and Bolero. Monday, the 2nd of February, at Juggy Sound, mixing sessions for the Band of Gypsies album are resumed. While Hendrix and Eddie Kramer were taking a break, Jimi jams with the Rosicrucians, a Queens-based band whose album Kramer was producing. Later, Jimi has an acoustic jam with Mitch Mitchell at his New York City apartment, followed by Tuesday the 3rd of February, and further recording for Power of Soul. Wednesday the 4th of February, at Michael Jeffrey's West 44th Street, New York City apartment, John Burks of Rolling Stone magazine interviews Jimi, Mitch, and Noel for the edition published March 19, 1970. Mitch recalled, Whence the idea came, I know not. Maybe the management, maybe Jimmy, maybe a bit of both. But the plan was, why don't we reform the experience? There was this management meeting in New York with the three of us. Then a lengthy interview with Rolling Stone, during which we announced the tour. After the interview, Jimmy went back to his apartment, and I went back to my hotel, and within a few hours I got a call from him. Could we meet up? Musically, the conversation was over in a very short time. It came down to, what do you think? I knew that he meant Noel. It was very tricky. Jimmy and I had great affection for Noel as a player and for his humor, but something didn't feel right. Anyway, I said, what do you think? And he shook his head. In the end, it came out in Billy Cox's favor. There's no doubt Jimmy felt he had to do the tour, because apart from anything else, Electric Lady, his studio project, was eating up huge sums of money, and he was up to his arse in debt. Anyway, the unfortunate thing about Noel was that he wasn't told until he came back to America, expecting to rehearse for the tour. Jimmy's shelved Black Gold Suite. Historically, Rolling Stone managing editor John Burke's interview with Hendrix, Mitchell and Redding at Mike Jeffries' Neo turn-of-the-century apartment was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated public relations campaign, a feature story about the reforming of the original Jimi Hendrix experience, and with it, the promise of a new record. However, as music journalist Tom Maxwell has revealed, there was more to the interview than at first glance. Instead, Maxwell has uncovered Hendrix's autobiographical, multi-song fantasy album concept, which sat unrealized in Mitch Mitchell's apartment for 20-odd years. Maxwell wrote, Hendrix moved into his own Greenwich Village apartment to do some writing and had come up with something new. Pieces, Hendrix said. I guess that's what you call it. Yeah, like pieces behind each other. Like movements, whatever you call it. I've been writing some of those. Because he could neither read nor write music, Hendrix recorded these new song sketches on cassette tapes, along with other songs he'd already been working on. On one label he wrote, Idea for LP Side 1 Suite, Black Gold. The tapes were made around the time of Burke's interview. I remember Jimmy telling me about his idea for Black Gold, Animals lead singer Eric Burdon remembered, an autobiographical, multi-song fantasy piece he had been working on. Jimmy intended it to accompany an animated feature about a black rock star, himself on the road, 40 minutes of fresh new material that clearly demonstrated the direction Jimmy was headed in. He talked excitedly about the cartoon character he'd envisioned. I know he did at least some work on the suite before he died. The Black Gold Suite was ultimately shelved. Hendrix would later polish and record some of the songs that appeared on the tapes, Drifting, Astro Man, Stepping Stone. Most would not find release. He later gave Mitchell the Black Gold cassettes in a box, tied shut with a headband and labeled BG, to work out studio arrangements. After Hendrix died, Mitchell forgot about them, apparently not even realizing the tapes contained unique material. Wednesday the 11th of February, Jimmy signs a deal for a film project called Wave, which would later be renamed Rainbow Bridge. According to Noel Redding, Hendrix and Warner's made a deal, with Mike Jeffrey as administrator. Jimmy got $300,000 against future experience and other royalties to complete the building of Electric Lady Studios. They figured they'd recoup the proceeds with an idea called Wave, later rechristened Rainbow Bridge, produced by Jeffrey and directed by Chuck Wine. It was supposed to be the counterculture's continuation of Easy Rider, Peter Fonda's smash independent film of the previous year. Jimmy guaranteed the loan by promising to write enough original material of experience quality to cover it. The reunion tour would certainly raise needed funds and take the pressure off Jimmy to write new material at a time when he was finding it very difficult to be creative. The contract also contained a certain guarantee reference, whereby Jimmy consented to Warner's deducting 20% of royalties due him from all Warner sources for the purpose set out in the Jeffrey guarantee, and included 6 semi-annual payments of $50,000 plus interest. Sunday the 15th of February, at Juggy Sound, Hendrix and Eddie Kramer continued with the final cut and the mixing of the Band of GYPSYS album. After his session, Hendrix headed to the record plant where a master mix for Sky Blues Today was made. This master, later renamed Stepping Stone by Hendrix, was coupled with the February 12th master of Isabella and would be released on April 13, 1970 as a Reprise Records single. Monday the 16th of February, after wrapping up mixing sessions at Juggy Sound Studio for the upcoming Band of GYPSYS live album, Jimmy and Buddy Miles met at the record plant to put some ideas to tape. They were joined by an anonymous percussionist and began with 2 strong instrumental takes of the Carl Perkins song, Blue Suede Shoes. According to those present, these arrangements were very different from the extended jam recorded by Band of GYPSYS on January 23, 1970. Next comes a beautiful rendition of Hey Baby, Land of the New Rising Sun, featuring vocals from Hendrix and a magnificent guitar with Spanish flamenco-style embellishments. The band then launched into an instrumental Summertime Blues. Miles and Hendrix were extremely tight on this unreleased gem. A funky original that sounded like the Beatles' Day Tripper continued the fun and energetic session. Another reel of unrehearsed jams was also recorded with the percussionist on maracas, but no further details are known. After Miles left, Hendrix continued to record with Billy Cox and Mitch Mitchell. They recorded Bleeding Heart, Bolero and Freedom. The latter would be released posthumously on the box set The Jimi Hendrix Experience, MCA 2000. Finally, on February 18th and 19th, at Sterling Sound, Jimi personally oversees the mastering of the completed Band of GYPSYS album. This after having been disappointed with the mastering of his earlier Experience album releases. That concludes this installment of the series. Stay tuned for the next episode, where we will begin the deep dive into March and April of 1970 of the Jimi Hendrix story, including the Cry of Love US tour, the release of the Band of GYPSYS live LP, plus more. Don't forget to subscribe for future content updates. And by the way, if you have any photos, stories or anecdotes to contribute, we would love to hear from you. Until next time,